If Ukraine falls during Trump's term, do you think Trump will be punished politically?
Depends on who wants to punish him. I think there are like two forces which we are talking about. The first one is the American people. I think most of American people will not punish him because, as I said, American people are mostly rational people. They do not want this war anymore. It's totally unnecessary. It totally incurs upon the financial, military, diplomatic damage on the American empire itself. So I don't think most of the American people will punish him. Maybe some of the, those extreme minority groups, those extremely, ideologically driven minority groups, or even some of the illegals, they might form some of the street protests against Trump, or even some of the individual lone wolf attacks against Trump or his administration, or some of the his cabinet members. Other than that, I don't think that's a huge concern. The other group is the American political establishment, political and financial establishment. They might, using their Democratic Party, or even some of the members within the Republican Party to launch political attacks against Trump, or even legal attacks, just as what they did back in 2021, 2022 against Trump. That is possible. They might even want to collude with some of the inside members of Trump's very own MAGA movement to launch attack against Trump. That is possible. But again, I think ending of the war in Ukraine would truly be beneficial to Ukrainian people, to Russian people, to Americans, and to Europeans, and literally to everyone around this world. The only force that wants this war to continue are Zelensky, because without war, he's nothing. Without war, his whole political career will be over. Even his life will be over, I guess. I don't know, right? Then these Wall Street, financial groups, globalist elites, the deep state, and these EU globalists, they want the war to continue because, as I said, they want to keep profiting from this war. They want to trade in Ukrainians' blood and Russians' blood for their own pockets or for their own political capital. That's what they want. They are the only ones who does not want this war to end. Other than that, I think most of the people wish to end this unnecessary conflict or unnecessary bloodshed. It has been shedding the blood of both Ukrainians, Russians, and even some of the foreign mercenaries. That is also unnecessary, right? Why would the British or French, die on the Ukrainian soil against Russians, which they have even never met in their life, right? Is there any inner hatred against Russians? I don't think so. But they were just sent there either by falsely directed ideological reasons or just by money, because they pay handsomely for these mercenaries in the Ukrainian conflict. But again, it's still unnecessary. People are dying there.
Okay. So if NATO or whatever forces in America manage to persuade Trump to continue the military aid to Ukraine, do you think Ukrainians can reverse the fortune on the battlefield?
I don't think so, because for the past 3 years, actually, right? The whole special military operations of Russian Federation in Ukraine started around, I think it was 2022 February. Now it's almost 3.5 years. And the Western allies, or the whole EU and American military industrial complex, they have already sent, God knows how many billions of aid or military aid, and even the military advisors, or even directly military combatants to the battlefield of Ukraine. But it still did not, crumble the Russian Federation. Plus all these Western economic sanctions around Russia, it actually only strengthened and hardened the Russian economy structure and the Russian industrial supply chain. And also domestically within Russia, people are more united than ever after the end of the Cold War. They are united than ever. So Russia is actually now stronger than ever after the end of the Cold War, right? So it did not change the balance of power on that battlefield. And also previously, there were those myths about the superiority of the Western military equipment, like M1 Abrams and Leopard 2, and then F-16 fighter jet, right? And you have seen literally all these 3 weapon systems which I just mentioned. They were all shut down or destroyed by the Russian weapons or by the Russian military equipment. Now, so the entire myth around, like the Western superiority in terms of technology in the military has been pretty much, bankrupted. Not to mention back in May, there was like Indo-Pakistan air battle, right? The French Rafale fighter was also shot down by the Chinese J-10. And you have to know this, J-10 is only a tier 2 fighter in China. We're about to see in September, there will be a huge Chinese parade, Chinese military parade, and we will see literally, I think J-20s, J-16s, all these, way more advanced fighter jets than the J-10. But even J-10 is able to tackle down the French Rafale fighter, which supposedly is literally one of the most, alongside with Typhoon, is one of the most advanced fighter jets in Europe right now, or in the Western Bloc. So that truth speaks louder than the propaganda. We know it. And that's just about the weapon, then about the personnel and the national resources. Do you think EU is actually able to meet endurably in that conflict in Ukraine? No. Russia literally is way more able to withstand the impact, both economically, diplomatically, politically, and militarily. Even as I said, within Russia, people are united than ever. Not to mention, Russia now has a support from North Korea, and that is direct military support. Economic-wise, Russian industrial supply chain is now getting closer to integrate with the Chinese supply chain, with the Chinese industrial production networks. If there is like ever a way tighter bond between the China's economic structure and Russia's economic structure, the potential forces of that alliance will be unprecedented. There is no way Europe can stop that. I just say there is no way Europe can stop that.
Okay. So moving on from this issue of military equipment, we have seen the news that Iran is in talks to procure the J-10C fighters. So do you think that should be a priority for Iran right now?
Okay, first of all, I have to correct you. I actually learned this from our Muslim brothers and from our Persian brothers. It's Iran, not Iran. Americans, Trump always said Iran. Actually, no, it's Iran.
Okay.
I think in Persian or in Arabic, that's what it's called, it's Iran. Speaking of the J-10s, we have seen, I think it was last month, the Iranian defense minister came to China, and he actually toured these are one of the J-10 fighters. I do think that is one of the priority from the military standing point, because look at Pakistan. I was reading an article about like Pakistani Air Force. It's actually literally the strongest Air Force in the entire the Muslim world. It's actually tremendous. Like back in the 60s and 70s, when there was Arab coalition against the Israel's aggression, right? It was a Pakistani Air Force that played a major ace combats in the battlefield. So salute to them. So Pakistan has J-10s. Obviously, I think Iran right border with Pakistan, especially under the tremendous existential threat from the West and also from Israel. Of course, he should procure this J-10, not just J-10 fighter, along with the PL-50 missiles, China's HQ-9 air defense system as well. It has to have this wholesale of integrated equipment to against the further or the future potential aggression from the external powers. That's from the military standing point. Then I think domestic-wise or politically, I think now the leadership of Iran literally needs a huge overhaul. At least it has to cleanse these pro-Western or pro-Israel factions within its own country, whether they are in the military, whether they are in the leadership, whether they are just like in the private sectors. You literally have to cleanse them. Otherwise, if next conflict breaks out, which might happen very soon, which might happen just in a couple months or within this year, then you will repeat the tragedy which we have witnessed in June. Your entire leadership has been wiped out even before the enemy attack started. And that is horrible. That is very scary. Like, what kind of nation would expect that over a night, half of their military leadership or their command structure, their key personnel have been wiped out by any means possible by these assassination attempts? That is scary. Iran has to focus on that. That's the second point. Then I think the third point, which is also vital to the Iranian survival, to the prosperity of this once great Persian line, is that it has to choose side right now. There is no more wishy-washy, like standing, in between. No, if Iran wants to survive, and if Iran wants to prosper, it has to form an alliance. Russians, Chinese, Pakistanis. I mean, these are the good choices for them. If they want to, keep standing in between the West and the rest, I mean, honestly, at the end, nobody will come to save them if there's another attack, right? Because we have seen the results. Even if some of the domestic factions within Iran always wanted to court with the Western's favor, they still get attacked. Trump still sends the B-2 bombers to drop these bunker busters on your nuclear facilities, which are totally illegal, right? Because it's actually legal for you to have these enrichment facilities for the civilian users, for the peaceful users, right? But they still bomb you. So what favor does it bring you? Simply courting or even bow down to the West. Wake up, Iranian people.
Okay, so if there's a choice, because Iran is a country that is facing resource constraint between producing more missiles or procuring the Chinese fighters. So which one do you think that the Iranian people should prioritize?
I think it's the Chinese jets at first, because we know that the Iranian forces, the Iranian Air Force, a lot of their equipment was back at the era of Shah, 1979, before 1977. You see, because F-14 Tomcats and even some of the F-4 Phantom fighters, that was back in the era of 60s, the Vietnam War, are still being used by the Iranian Air Force. And these are, of course, 2 generations behind the current mainstream fighters in the world, whether in the Middle East or in the West. So Iran has to upgrade on that. Then I think only after the Iranian pilots have been familiar with the operational guidance or the operational procedures of the newer fighters like J-10, after that they could equip the best missiles. Then when there comes a time of the ultimate or the final showdown with its aggressors, then its whole joint military capacity, its integrated training capacity will showcase its strength in a real fight, right? And the other thing you were saying about the resource constraint, I think that's why Iran really has to rally its allies. Because honestly, it ever comes down to the survival of a nation and of an entire alliance of nations. I think the other nations within your bloc will be willing to lend a helping hand, which means even if you have some resource or the financial constraints right now, let's say even if you can't pay us right now your entire squadron of your missile supplies, but I think if we truly care about you, if you have showcased your strength, your will to resist against the foreign aggression, I think we will be willing to just give you the missiles for now, then you can pay us later, right? Or we could have some other reciprocal deals which could offset the financial cost of these missiles, right? I think, again, as I always say, now it's year 2025. It is a time of global turbulence. That means the priority goes to national survival. The priority goes to politics. The priority does not go to those commercial or the transactional relations anymore, which means it's not everything is about money. And that is a false concept that was erected by the Western capitalism. That is the fundamental flaw of the Western capitalism, right? Of these globalists, they always wanted to make every interaction between human beings, between individuals and between nations as money and money. No, that's not the case anymore. I think there are some other values which we should all cherish. There is friendship, there is trust, there is loyalty, there is bonding among allies, among people, among nations. So I don't think Iran has to truly worry about the resource constraint. I think as long as their leadership or their political standing is on the right and proper place, then I think the rest of the equipment will follow, no matter if they are able to pay right now or not.
Okay, speaking of the commercial relations, the French general is saying that China has been smearing their Rafale fighter. So do you think China is smearing the effectiveness of the French military exports?
Of course, no. First of all, China wasn't smearing anyone because that news actually came out from Pakistan, right? It's not coming out from China. The other thing that was confirmed by at least 2 sources, as far as I know. First source is confirmed from the Indian defense minister himself. The guy went to the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore just I think a month or so ago. He confirmed the losses of the some of the Indian fighter jets in the air battle with Pakistan, even though he did not blame the cause of the air battle losses to the French Rafale fighters' capacities. He said it was because like India wasn't truly ready for it, or India sort of underestimated its opponents. But still, I mean, the facts are facts. The French Rafales were shot down, right? Even the French themselves, they said that. I think there was like a spokesperson from the French military department. So he said the Rafales were shot down not because of the like design flaws or the capacity deficiencies of that fighter jets. He said it was because the Indian Air Force wasn't using it properly or following the procedure. Either way, there are just facts that these Rafale fighters were shot down by the Chinese J-10s. And as far as we know, Chinese J-10 did not suffer a single loss. And that's a fact. Even The Economist, even the very pro-liberal media, The Economist, they actually said that in their podcast. They said, the facts that, some of the Indian jets, and possibly some of them were like French Rafales, were shot down. Of course, they would come up with, all the bunch of other reasons, like about training, about the capacity of the Indian pilots. But the facts are facts. And as I always say, it's not just about like the Chinese J-10 versus French Rafale anymore. It's a whole system, all right? Because from what I heard, like Pakistani fighter jets actually engaged. They actually launched the missiles, the PL-50 missiles, within the Pakistani airspace, within the Pakistani territory. So which means it's possible that in that air battle back in May, these two forces actually did not even directly met or seen each other. So it was like a out of the visibility conflict. So that means the operational results of that air battle comes from the whole and joint integrated systems. From what I know, Pakistani, they had J-10 fighters, they had the PL-50 missiles, which were like able to shoot all the way, I think around 300 kilometers or 500. I think that's at least like 180 plus miles. That's a tremendous range as an air-to-air combat missile, okay? The other thing is, it wasn't a J-10 was guiding that missile. It was that missile was actually guided. It was only launched by J-10. It was guided by the airborne warning and control system from the Pakistani Air Force. So it is an integrated system. And it might be literally the very first time in the human history that we've seen this integrated system in application, in actual usage, in an actual combat. So that is like the pioneer or the vanguard of that type of warfare. Americans have been, coming up with these concepts long ago, but the Indian air battle in May might be literally the first time that concept was put into use. And these equipments were not American equipments, were mostly Pakistani and Chinese equipments.
Okay, so do you think the Western military equipment has been suffering from this issue? Their battle-tested data are not from the actual conflict, but from all those insurgencies.
Let's talk about the so-called, we used to have this myth about the Western military equipment superiority, right? The time when I was growing up, back in the 90s or even the early 2000s, I always had these, these tremendous maxims, the military equipment maxims, right? My mom bought them to me. So if you look at the aircraft carriers or even the fighter jets sessions, for the aircraft carriers, they were mostly American ones, like the USS Enterprise, then the Nimitz class, right? The Kitty Hawk class. And then afterwards, they had their Ford class. You thought, okay, man, that's tremendous, right? Wow, that's magnificent. That's what we thought. Then if you look into the fighter jet section, there were mostly only two streams of the fighter jets. One is Russian, the Flankers family. I have to say that is literally, I think it's one of the most beautiful fighter jets in the world. Seriously, like Flanker just beautiful. Then the other mainstream, other stream of the fighter jets were mostly American. They had like F-14, F-15, F-16, F-18, all the way to F-22, right? Then F-35. Back then, we thought that's the only thing, we have in this world. But now fast forward to 2025, other nations, China, Pakistan, now we have our own fighter jets, which are tremendous and just like equally competitive and even more superior than some of the American equipments. I'll just give you a couple concrete examples, okay? Back in the 1960s, Taiwan, the Republic of China, which is a secessionist regime in Taiwan, right? 1990s, they had F-16s. Back then, F-16 were like the most advanced fighter jet back then. And China only had some of the old flankers and even like older ones, like the copycat version of MiG-21s, right? Back then, that's what we had. So China was like one generation behind Taiwan because Taiwan used the American equipment. But now, fast forward to 2025, China has all these fourth generation, fifth generation, most advanced and most updated fighter jets. Taiwan still only has F-16 and are very outdated. No matter what they say, they have this called F-16 Viper or the F-16-V, these upgrades. It's still a F-16, right? That is like nowadays I drive a brand new 2025 Mercedes, and now you have a 1980s Mercedes. Which one is better? I mean, still, right? It's a 1980s Mercedes. It doesn't matter what tires or what engines you put into it. It's still a 1980s Mercedes. There's no way that car is gonna outcompete my car in terms of technology advance, right? That's the same with the Western weapons. Speaking of that, I think that is also tightly connected with the industrial decline of the entire West. After 1980s, there are whole neoliberal economic policies which outsource, which hollow out their industries to the developing countries. Americans, according to their mainstream economic theories, they thought that's a good choice. They thought because America was doing the high value add works, like the servers or design works, while the developing nations like us, like China, or even India, Vietnam, we were doing the lower end value add jobs. But what actually happened was China used the American technology transfer back in the 90s. So China started to manufacture for ourselves. Then we started to build up our manufacturing clusters. Then we start to slowly but consistently, persistently going up the value chain. So now China has two things. First, it's literally the unrivaled, the unmatched industrial forces in the world. There's literally no country in the world that can outmatch China in terms of production capacity. Then while on the other hand, China will also have the technology know-how that mostly rivals the American technology know-how, but in some area even outmatches with the American technology, right? So the entire West versus East in terms of military, in terms of the military equipment, was originally coming from the industrial hollowing out process of the United States. Now, just going back to the military, again, Chinese as a catch-up nation, we also, we know that if we want to catch up, we have to, use the asymmetrical advantage, or we have to come up with like innovative solutions to aim at our competitors, which was America, right? We know it. We know it was America. Because think about this. What did Americans say? The Bush neocons back in 2003 at the Defense Department, people like Rumsfeld, what did they say? They said after Baghdad was Tehran, then Beijing. That's what they said. They literally said that. So of course, I mean, as the Chinese government or a Chinese decision maker back then, they were like, okay, so Americans were after us, right? So what do we have to do? So we use the innovative solutions to counter the American threats, the potential American threats. Here's what happened, concrete examples. America had 11 plus aircraft carriers, the huge ones, like 80,000, 90,000 tons of the displacements, those giant like iron castles floating around the seas around the world, right? Just like the British Empire, like they call themselves the guardian of the seas, right? They were like riding the waves. So China know that back then at least, we couldn't rival the American aircraft carriers by number or even by quality. So there's only one way we could do to counteract that threat: hypersonic anti-ship missiles. Now China has, we have like DF-21 and DF-26. Some call it the carrier busters. Some call it the Guam busters, the military bases of United States in Western Pacific, the Guam, right? Now suddenly with these hypersonic missiles, which only China has in this entire world, that we render the American aircraft carriers, used to be the Americans' competitive advantage, we render them useless or we render them obsolete. Now they become like the dreadnoughts back in the World War II. Think about what happened to the Japanese Empire. Japan had literally the biggest, and even by today's standard, is magnificent battleship, with like, I think like 16 inches guns or even 18 inches guns. Back then, the battleship Yamato. But what happened to Yamato? Yamato was sunk, I believe, in the around the Strait of Mariana, I believe, 1944 or 1945, by the entire squadrons of the American aircrafts or the American bomber fighters that were launched from the multiple American aircraft carriers, right? So 80 years back then, 1945, that dreadnoughts, those big battleships, were getting obsolete. They were being replaced by the operational efficiency of the aircraft carriers and the aircraft that were launched from them. Nowadays, the same happened to the American aircraft carriers. They were only being replaced now, this time by the hypersonic missiles. Same logic, right? So that very notion, that very myth of the invincibility of the Western military technology, I mean, now it has been shattered. We've all seen it.
Yep. Moving on from this, we have also seen the news that the Indian Foreign Minister, Jaishankar, is visiting China. So why do China and India want to maintain these very good relations?
As I always say, I don't think China and India, it doesn't have to be the natural enemies, even though we border with each other. It's like we border with Russia, but we are not enemies with Russia, right? After India was founded, I think 1947, 48, arbitrarily by the British governor, the Lord Mountbatten. I assume the guy, he had known nothing about India. Yet the guy became the last governor of India, which was ironic itself, that fact. But anyway, India was actually also partnering with China as part of this non-aligned movement in the Cold War. It was only like after 1962, we had like border clash. Then, the relationship turned to be sour. And then after 90s, when the West was trying to contain the rise of China, because they were sort of afraid of the potential rise of China. So they started to channel or amass India, rally India to against China. So that's why, nowadays we have this economic clash, when Chinese manufacturer Xiaomi went to India, then the assets were frozen, and some of the Chinese apps were also officially banned in India as well, right? With no recourse. And then we have our border clash, in places like southern Tibet, up on the very high mountains. These are totally unnecessary, because I think Indians have to realize this. Americans or the West, they've never treated India as equal. They've never genuinely treated India as their closest partner. They only court with India because they want India to do everything they can at any cost possible to contain, to agitate China. Once Indian politicians and Indian people realize that, they would know that their ultimate interest or their ultimate direction of their policies lies with befriending with China, lies with becoming part of this bigger Asian Union. It's like Asia is for Asians. Think about this. In the whole Asia, all the way from Indian subcontinent, all the way to ASEAN countries like Southeast Asia, and then to the South China Sea, or even to the Northeast Asia, Korean Peninsula, and also China's relationship with Japan as well. Most of the issues, disputes which we have among us Asians, among the Asian nations, mostly these issues can be solved if we Asians could just solve the issue ourselves. If we can just close the door and deal with the issue ourselves. Even China with Philippines on the South China Sea. These issues can all be negotiated peacefully, resolved very soon. It was only because the Western involvement in these issues, so that made the situation way more complicated and way more dire than it has to be. So I think the ultimate solution here is just Asia is for Asians. That's a pure fact. You can't just because the Western imperialists, they started to come to Asia 400 years ago. They started to deeply involve or intervene with the Asian affairs, so that today they still enjoy the rights to do so. That's not the case anymore. The world has changed. So we Asians have to be strong and united together as a whole, the Asian brothers, Asian sisters.
So speaking of the Philippines, the Filipinos has been saying that China should be giving up its nuclear weapons and should respect the 2016 decision by ICJ to enforce its territorial claims in the South China Sea. Why do you think the Filipinos is hyping up the tension against?
Okay, first of all, I actually have to ask you, on what ground did they say that China should give up its nuclear weapons?
So recently, China and ASEAN has been talking about signing this treaty called the denuclearization of the ASEAN. And during the process, I think the Filipino asked China to give up its nuclear weapons.
But I mean, on what ground? What's the reasoning for it? Because if you want to propose that China dismantle the nuclear forces, then you have to have a reason. So what's the reason?
So I guess
what's the rationale?
I guess they don't want China to be a nuclear power state in Asia.
Okay, yeah, of course. If I were the Chinese policy decision maker right now, of course I would do that, but under the condition that China dismantle all of its nuclear forces, United States dismantle all of its nuclear forces, United Kingdom dismantle all of its nuclear forces, France dismantle all its nuclear forces, and United States will revoke the nuclear weapons which they have shipped and which they have sent to Israel. If all these conditions can be met, of course, I think if I were the Chinese decision maker, I would dismantle the nuclear weapons, but under the precondition which I just mentioned. That's the first thing. The other thing you said about the ICJ, I think most of the people now we know what is ICJ for. ICJ since its founding, and the ICC, right, the International Criminal Court, they only, they are pretty much like similar organizations. I think you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. They pretty much only persecute the people from Africa or people from Southern Europe or some other places. If you know what I mean. Have they ever actually arrested any like Western politicians, Western diplomats, or Western military leaders? Have they ever held these warmongers in the American neocon administrations accountable? Have they ever sent like the extradition letter to Obama because the guy actually sent a bunch of like drones to bomb Pakistan, to bomb the civilians in Afghanistan as well? Have they ever held these actual war criminals accountable? No, not at all. Right? They actually give I think these same group of people, they give the Nobel Prize to Obama only because he was elected as president and being a black. I mean, actually, the guy I don't think he's actually black though, because I think he's like Indonesian plus like white Jewish, something like that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, if Philippines, they agree with my precondition, and all the rest of the countries which I just mentioned also agree and to follow the execution of my precondition, of course, yes. Then I think China will dismantle all its nuclear forces, right? We don't have any issue with that. Then speaking of why Philippines is actually that active in doing that, because we know why. Come on, what happened in the 1898 American and Spanish War? That Philippines were taken by America because America win the war against. It's like one imperialist power fought the war and win against another imperialist power. It's like new versus old. Then the new win out of that fight. Then Philippines become part of the American possession, even though they don't call Philippines as American colony, but we all know what exactly it is. I still recall what happened back in 2011. There was like typhoon, I think it was called Typhoon Haiyan in Philippines. It was a huge disaster, okay? And if you see what CNN did, the footage of CNN interviewing people on the streets in Philippines, they were literally crying and shouting like, "Please, America, send us the help. There's nothing we can do anymore." So the essence or the nature of the government on the island of Philippines is ineffective, and it does not have any full national sovereignty. It does not even have the full administrative capacity to take care of its own people. So it's pretty much a semi-American colony. So of course now we see that I think the guy's name is Marcos, the current leader of Philippines, and all his political patrons, his interest groups. Of course, it perfectly aligns with the interests of the American warmongers, the deep state. So of course, whenever American give them the order, the directive, they would just follow it, including just like biting China without no reason. I didn't even know they have such a fanatic idea that okay, China should dismantle all its nuclear weapons. Okay, I think great idea, but let your lord master, the Americans, the British, French, and Israelis, if they dismantle first, okay, we will do that, right?
So do you think that the Filipinos have been motivated by this anxiety that because Trump is inherently isolationist and sees no value of Philippines, that this is their last window of opportunity to get something out of China?
I agree with that assumption. I think first of all, but your suggestion that this is their last chance to get something out of China, I think that is totally wrong. There's nothing Philippines can do, to exploit the advantage out of China. There's no way they can do that. They don't have the morally righteous reason to do so, nor do they have any capacity to squeeze any inch of patronage out of China. The other thing is, I think what they were doing is because when they see Trump rising, when they see the whole MAGA movement, they know that their value as like political governing class in Philippines are diminishing, given that America is turning more isolationist, right? So that they want to squeeze the last inch of profits, the last inch of patronage, out of the American empire, out of the American deep state, because their benefits can only be granted by the Americans, not by Chinese, because there's no way we will grant them any benefits, because, if they were our friends, right? If they were our close allies, of course, we can just sit down and we could help each other, right? Even China, China could send you more aid in whatever aspects, military, economy, and all the other things, right? No problem. But once you want to like poke China as Ukrainians did to poking the Russian bear, why would we give you anything in return? Of course, no. The only thing we will give you back is the rage which we have against you, and that would be very dangerous given the power weight of China today, right? So what they've been doing is only to appease or to beg from these American deep state so that they could enjoy some of the last inches of the political patronage of the profits out of the American taxpayers.
Okay, last question. Speaking of the ICC, the Philippines actually arrested their former president, Duterte, into the international court. So do you think this is another case that the entire global justice has been failing?
We all know that like the entire global justice system is pretty much virtually non-existent. The current world order has been running on these, like IMF, the so-called Bretton Woods system, the world banks, after the 1945, right? America was a triumphant power, the only global hegemon versus Soviet Union out of that. So America pretty much like set up this entire system. And you have to say, at the very beginning of that order, there were some merits out of that system. But now, 80 years after, the world has changed a lot. The world has shifted a lot. That this system is not self-sustaining anymore. And this system is not serving the interest of most of the people around this world, of most of the nations around this world, right?
So how close is the ASEAN and China from signing the Code of Conduct of the South China Sea?
I think it should be close. Like the only two forces that is standing in between now and completing this Code of Conduct is two forces. First is Philippines, right? Because they want to spoil the whole cooperative frameworks, right? The other one is the Americans, especially the American military presence in the Western Pacific. So once we could get rid of these two forces, first of all is pro-American regime or the pro-American fascist regime in Philippines. And once if we could drive the American military presence out of the Western Pacific, then I think the rest of us, China and all the ASEAN brothers, we could quickly sort out this issue. If there is a righteous regime in Philippines that want to join us, of course we welcome that, right? Even the Americans, we do want a peace with the Americans. We don't want any war, any conflict. And I do hope Trump is smart, or Trump's administration is rational enough, to also sign a deal with us, Like, I think as our president said, I think Pacific Ocean is vast enough to have all these nations living, coexisting together. That's our principle.